readers. This is Karen, and I'm very excited to be joined today by NCIS Los Angeles executive producer, writer, and director, Frank Military. Frank, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Of course, it's excellent to be here.
I wanted to maybe start our questions with a couple of bigger picture questions about the show, how the show gets put together. And maybe to start with, you could tell us a little about what you do as an executive producer on NCIS LA. Maybe what does a typical week look like for you if you're not also writing and directing the episode?
You know, what's great about my job is every day is really different. I could be waking up and going in to do post-production, to work on editing a show. I could be going in to look at visual effects on an episode. I could be going into a mix to to mix the sound of the episode. That's where everything, you know, comes together, the dialogue, the effects, the music. I could be going in to do what's called a spot, which is basically where you go and speak with the composer and discuss where you'd like the music to go and what the tone of the music should be. And you also at that point have another opportunity to speak about visual effects and things like color timing, how we can change the colors and the lighting of the show in post-production. I could be going to set as a producer working on an episode that I've written that somebody else is directing. Mm-hmm. I could be going to set and directing an episode I've written. I could be going into the office and helping another writer sketch out, beat sheet for an episode to go over ideas. I could be going to a production meeting where you have all of the department heads discussing the script that's about to start pre-production. We do pre-production for 7 or 8 days on an episode once a script is finished, and then we do production for 7 or 8 days on that episode. And there's a meeting that happens in the beginning, which is called the concept meeting. I could be going to that where everybody's seeing the script for the first time and they get to ask questions. And then the team, the production producer, line producer, the art department, locations, casting, all those people will go off and begin working on the episode. And then at the end of that week of prep, they'll come back and we'll have what's called a production meeting. And this is the last big meeting you have before you start to shoot the next morning. So again, any final questions, how problems were solved, happen in that meeting. And then the next day, that team, that director, that writer, producer, hits the location or the stage and begins shooting. So I could be going to a concept meeting, a production meeting, and then occasionally I could be going into my home office in my pajamas with my coffee and getting to write, which is awesome time.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so it's really the great thing about the job is that it's so, as an executive producer, it's so diverse. Every day is something different. And, occasionally there's those days where, you're just putting out fires or there's problems of some kind. But every day is different and fun.
Wow, it does sound fun. If you like variety, that sounds amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and if you feel, facile and, a lot of executive producers in television have their niches that, there's guys that in the business, big, well-known writers, TV producers who are very focused on one area. Like they only write and they don't really do pre-production or post-production or get on set or any of that stuff. They don't even really work with actors. I'm lucky because, as a background of, I used to be an actor as well as a writer, and all I ever wanted to be was a director. So, um, so I do feel very comfortable. I've owned recording studios, so I feel very comfortable mixing the show, working with the editors and editing the show, um, uh, going onto the set and discussing things with actors. So I do enjoy it because I do feel comfortable in all those arenas. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, a lot of executive producers will just focus on a couple of elements. They'll just write and do some editing, or
That makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to ask you about your directing, but before we get to that, let me ask you a few questions about writing on the show. We are wikiDeeks, so of course we focus most of our attention on the exploits of Marty Deeks. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about
Character on the show.
I'm sorry, say that again?
The most awesome character on the show.
Is that really what you think?
Well, he is so unique and so much fun to write for. And as great as Eric is with comedy,
Mm-hmm.
and the relationship, fun kind of aspect of the relationship with Kenzie, he is also just such an incredible dramatic actor that there's nothing you can throw at him that he can't do.
Great. Interesting. So what was it like when you first started working on, you came at the beginning of season 2, right?
Yes.
So that was kind of just when Kenzie and Deeks were getting started working together full time. And
yes.
What was your initial impression of them as characters, individual characters, and then as a potential couple? Were you drawn to them from the start?
I have to say, from the beginning, I was actually interested in writing for LL Cool J's character, Sam Hanna. That's the one that I didn't see a lot of people writing for. So when I came on the show, I said, well, that's the guy I want to write for. But they very clearly had chemistry. That was clear to everybody going forward. And then you're left with this this challenge of how do you move this relationship forward in a way that will sustain a show that's going to run a long time. And by the time I got onto the show I think was in syndication very early, from episode 6. And I came on in the second season. So we knew this show was going to run for a while, maybe not as long as it's run now, but it was going to be a successful show at that point. So knowing that, you have to be able to tell the story of that relationship in a way that will sustain. You can't push the gas too fast. But at the same time, we're not in Victorian England, so you have to try to really come up with conceits that work in a modern world of why two young people who are unattached, who emotionally want a relationship, why they're not together. And so it becomes a bit of a challenge. If one of them was married, or again, if we were back in Victorian England and they came from 2 different classes, there are elements that you could use, but you don't have those in modern world. So it's a real challenge to realistically keep them apart. For what's turned out to be now 9 years.
Exactly.
And yet have fun with them, at the same time. Yeah. So it's that was the real challenge with that relationship, and when I wrote the end of season 9, that there was only one thing left to do with them at that point, which was break them up.
Right.
Um, it was, the classic formula of boy meets girl, and 9 years later, boy loses girl, or for 2 episodes,
Right. Exactly.
and the time in between, season 9 and season 10.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was the last kind of thing we could do. And I think at that point, then we knew they were going to have to get married.
You finally had to cave in and do it, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. The same way earlier on, I forget what season it was, where we had to at least begin to acknowledge to the audience that they had begun seeing each other romantically, even if the team didn't officially know about it. That was the challenge with those guys, because the challenge was never their day-to-day relationship. They had so much chemistry and had so much fun working together, and playing the innuendo and the subtlety of their love. That was always very easy. It was always the big picture things that we had to do this dance with.
Yeah. Let me ask you a little bit about your writing style. I think you've definitely written some later episodes over the years, like Seal Hunter and Crazy Train, which are 2 of my favorites. But you've become known, I think, in the fandom for episodes that have a bit of a darker tone to them. And I'm curious if you see a difference in tone between like the darker side of your work and, say, a more typical episode of the show.
I definitely write in a different style than I think a lot of the writers. I think it's a real testament to Shane Brennan and to Scott Yimmel, who allowed the show to have that kind of dynamic range. The truth is, if I could write funnier, I would. I just, I've learned to try to go towards my strengths, and if I could get one funny scene, I'll write it, or one funny runner, I'll write it. But it's my natural instinct to gravitate towards drama. And it's interesting when people talk about darkness. I don't see it as dark. To me, it's ultimately, what are the episodes about? And if they are life affirming and they are about the human condition and about love and about the family that makes up this team, then that to me is not dark. To me, violence with no purpose is dark. I've always kind of seen it differently than other people. Now, having said that, my episodes are different. Also, I've just been tasked to write episodes that occur, and this might go to talking about the overarching aspect of the show versus the episodic specific aspect. Right. But I've been asked to write episodes that are, we save Kenzie, we rescue the team after their car blows up. So these are big moments for the characters in the show. So naturally, they have to be written in a different way than if you're just writing a typical episode in the middle of the season where the group or the individuals are not going through anything large.
Yeah, makes total sense.
So having said that, I do create large things. I mean, one of the first things I wrote, I think it was the first episode I wrote, was they were investigating the kidnapping of a young girl, of a Navy officer, and the MO of the killer was to bury the victims in a box under the ground,
Mhm.
you know, which is very dark. But really, what was interesting to me about it was, you know, that Sam had had a similar experience when he was in combat, and kind of revisiting that experience for him, and how saving this girl became a way of kind of purging uh,
Mhm.
the horror of that experience for himself. So I kind of do create those. That was an episode in the middle of the season.
Yeah.
Um, so I think I do kind of create those episodes, as opposed to an episode where, you know, a body drops, we investigate it, we solve it, and we're having a great day and we go on with life.
Exactly. Well, let me ask you about one of your most memorable episodes, which is the season 4 cliffhanger of Descent, which was, I think, an example of how frightening sometimes your episodes can be because of how far you're willing to take these characters. And can you talk a little bit about how you approached writing it? And I'm particularly curious about that final scene, which basically obsessed the entire fandom for the whole summer in between that and the season 5 premiere.
Remind me what that final scene
Oh
was.
my gosh, I can't believe you don't remember that one. That's vividly implanted in all of the heads of all Deeks fans. That's where Deeks and Sam get captured by Sidoroff, and the final scene and the final moment of that scene is Deeks being tortured.
Oh
Uh,
yes, yes. It's where they go in on his teeth. They go to,
yeah,
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 and Sam's being electrocuted. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, well, you know, it was a season finale and a cliffhanger, and you know, I wanted to take the characters as far as they could possibly go, and
Hmm.
make something that was irresistible to not come back to. Uh, you know, which was ultimately our job as writers. Um,
Hmm.
you do get a little bit of an advantage at a season finale. It's an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage is that it's one of the rare times you can leave the characters in a cliffhanging moment.
Hmm.
Uh, the disadvantage is it better be really good, because they're not coming back for 3 or 4 months
Yep.
in between seasons. So it's got to be something that sustains, you know, that kind of chasm.
Yeah.
You know, I really wanted to. I think that's the first time I did a season finale for the show. So
Hmm.
I really wanted it to be something that people came back for. And then the other interesting thing about writing an episode like that is, whenever you're doing 2-parters, is the first part is much easier in a sense, because you can make this incredibly difficult situation a terrible puzzle, or an impossible box to get out of,
Hmm.
and you don't have to solve it.
Right.
You leave it to the next writer. The only problem is, when you're the next writer, all you've done is made a big problem for yourself. So you know, that's what happened at the end of season 9. You know, when you know, I wrote an episode that sent them to Mexico, and then Scott wrote an episode where they all blow up in a car at the end,
And then he gives it back to you for
and
the.
says, "Go ahead, solve it. Put the whole thing back together. We're all good."
I have confidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you know, that was born of that, of really trying to make an episode that was as compelling as possible for our characters.
Hmm. I also wanted to ask you about one of the more controversial moments on the show, which is the death of Michelle Hanna, which
Yeah.
I've always assumed we should make Scott Gemmell responsible for that decision, but I'm curious how you felt about it and how you approached writing that episode.
I wasn't even there. I don't know what you're talking about.
In Uncaged?
I'm
Sam's wife.
joking with you.
You had nothing to do with it, really. They just put your name on it.
Michelle who? Yeah, well, honestly, it came from a couple of things. Anjanou, the actress that played Michelle, is a very, very successful and accomplished actress, which, is one of the reasons that she was cast. We loved her. But the problem is, unless you lock somebody up as a principal cast member, they're free to go on and do whatever they want. And she has had, a wonderful career. So it became a character that we couldn't go to in a reliable way. And as a result, we couldn't get drama from it or comedy from it. We literally couldn't have her to the extent that we wanted to.
Yeah.
So it put Sam's character in this real, his personal life became very staid and didn't give us anything.
Mm-hmm.
And because Callan's character, Chris O'Donnell's character, had, a kind of Spartan existence and a very specific backstory at that point, it really was shutting off a lot of potential for the show. And that's when you're doing a story, you first look for something that's a terrific story. But ideally, you want it to be story that gives you more story. And story that doesn't give you more story is a problem. You talked about that last moment at the end of Descent. At the end of Descent, you had a team that was completely hobbled. Week after week after week, we get the bad guy, we solve the crime, and we're in great shape. Now suddenly, we had really had our legs kicked out from underneath us and needed to recover both physically and emotionally, interpersonally, and as a team. Kenzie and Deeks, Sam and his wife, in terms of what had happened, how far she had to go in that undercover. So that gave us more story. It gave us more things to go. The Michelle character was not doing that simply because we didn't have the actress. So we had to find a way to move forward. And that became something we were discussing early on. But trying to find the right time to do that, because it's such a big element for a character. Now, what it did do, in a show that's usually having a lot of fun, is it gave us a lead actor who now was going to have to mourn for a while. We couldn't, you're joking, I would joke that you cut back this episode after Michelle died and Sam's on Tinder, looking at things. So, that was the thing we were fighting, is this was a character that really loved his wife, was an incredibly loyal and dedicated person, and had children, and there was going to have to be a real seriousness to carrying forward this death for quite a while. And here we are in season 10, and it's still something that's hobbling Sam and making him have pause in moving forward in his life,
Right.
Which is, the idea. But then what's beginning to happen is you also start to see the potential for the future, for future relationships. And I think as we move towards that, we'll start to have a lot more fun for Sam Hanna. So that was kind of the thinking of that, in doing that aspect of the show, of the story.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, so I definitely wanted to ask you about your directing on the show. So according to IMDb, Spoils of War wasn't just the first NCIS LA episode you ever directed, but it was your first time directing ever in your career. Is that right?
It's kind of, I mean, directed, student films, and some of them won, some awards.
Mhm.
Student Academy has awards, and it won some of the local things, and then it went to second place in the national. And so I did that stuff. And then I directed some America's Most Wanted reenactments.
Hmm.
I also directed theater. So and it's really all I've ever focused on. But Spoils of War really was the first big time professional thing that I did. And again, I don't know how much thought was put into it, but I was slated to write and direct, I believe it was episode 18. And what fell on episode 18 was go rescue Kenzie, because she's been in lost for a long time on that season. And I remember Shane Brennan looking at me and saying, I would never give an episode of this scope to a first-time director. But it's what I've studied my whole life. I approach it very classically and seriously, and I storyboard as much as I possibly can of the episodes. Like I said, because I come from a kind of diverse background, there's, everybody was always worried about the technical background with first-time directors, but I've been an avid photographer my whole life. I've owned a recording studio. I've done lots of video editing starting in the 90s, before people did it. I've edited, when I was young, I edited movies on film. So all of these aspects. I have a friend of mine who's a terrific director. He's one of the directors for Westworld. He said, "You are the safest first-time director that ever was." And on top of that, really, the thing that changes it more than anything is I've been on shows where I was basically a set producer, the liaison between the writer, the executive producers, and the directors. And so there are times when I've been on set for entire seasons, not to mention, just oodles of episodes that I've written. Right. So you get to see, I always equate it to doctors kind of, how doctors have to go and do these, when they're learning, have to do these ridiculously long shifts. And the purpose is that they can really see the evolution of a problem when it comes in the door of the hospital, so they get to see how the person comes in, the initial treatment, what works, what doesn't work, how it begins to work, and what it looks like, 24 hours later or 16 hours later, that you don't get if you just pop in and see a quick snapshot, because you jump in on any day on set and take a look at what's going on. And I guarantee you 4 hours later, it's going to look completely different. And what the problems are and what's working are going to be completely different. 4 hours later, the next day, and you really have to do it for, I think, years to begin to get a sense of the scope of creating a reality, which is what directing is in so many ways, and all of the impediments that can get thrown in your path that you have to be able to rock and roll with. Directing is all about prepping, planning, having everything ready, and then being able to toss it out the window and improvise because something changed. Right. And particularly, it's one of the advantages. There's a lot of advantages that I have as a writer director that the directors that come into the show don't have. I admire what they do, and I don't think I could do it. Or I don't know if I could do it. I've never tried. But the idea is I only direct what I write. So I've been inside it sometimes for 2 months, at least a month, if not 6 weeks, but sometimes 2 or 3 months I've been inside it. I've been able to prep it, do my own prep before the episode actually begins, an official prep 7 days before we shoot. I've been able to start storyboarding and coming up with ideas. And then when I hit the first day of prep, even before, I'm speaking with the art department and showing them ideas about sets and locations and how we're going to do things. So that's a big advantage that I have. You know, the directors that come in on our show, on old TV shows, they get the script, they've got 7 or 8 days to read it, get inside it, understand it, plan their shots, figure out locations, cast it. So it's a real advantage for me doing it. I don't know if I could do it the other way. So that's one aspect of being a first-time director that you know was you know I had a lot of ability to do that kind of stuff. And again, you know, having said that, I remember I walked out on the set for the first day of Spoils of War, and we very rarely, but that day we happened to be shooting pickups from another episode. So in essence, we walked out to this desert ranch location, and there were, in essence, 2 crews. And I don't know how often you've been on set on our show, but, you know, we look like the circus came to town, you know, and now it was 2 circuses came to town. So it was just trucks and helicopters and in the episode I was directing, I had a menagerie of animals. So we had trainers and guys coming in with camels, and I remember doing the first scene, and the first scene I directed had a lot of the cast, plus a bunch of extras. It had 6 horses, it had a camel, and we were shooting. I had chosen a location in a very swampy kind of area. And, you know, suddenly the trainers tell me, well, you know, when Todd and Chris, LL Cool J and Chris O'Donnell get off their horses and the other guys get off their horses, the horses are going to walk away. And I'm like, well, they can't, that looks horrible. That doesn't happen in a Western, you know, and the shot I had designed came down, and you saw them riding up in the background, and then right in the foreground came this head of a camel. And that was, they were tracking the guy that rode the camel. And the camel wouldn't keep his head up. He kept pushing, you know, as the crane would come down, you know, this big scene with them riding in, and the crane is coming down. And just as the crane would come down, the camel would duck out of frame and start eating the grass. And I thought, oh my God, I've destroyed my career. I didn't even start. Like, they're going to take this away from me right now. So that was fun. But yeah, that was basically my first time doing it. So I got thrown into the kind of the deep end of the pool.
Yeah, well, it was a great episode. One final question for you, which is coming all the way forward then to your most recent directing efforts, which were the season 9 finale and then the season 10 premiere, which had so many, both of those episodes had so many really cinematic moments, like the sequence where they pull up to the airport in the rain, and all of those epic shots of Kenzie hauling Deeks around the desert, and that beautifully lit scene in the church. Do you think your directorial style has evolved over time?
I hope so. You know, I hope I've started to think in those ways. And, you know, part of that is also, you know, TV is evolving in those ways too. You know, TV used to be called, you know, a radio with some pictures. And, you know, until I remember when I first started in the business, my first job was on Miami Vice. Mm-hmm. And I was watching the show, and I saw this. I think I forget if Ferrari or Corvette, or he drove this really cool car, and it was this very wide tableau, and it was a restaurant with neon and the moon and a palm tree, and it was just a great wide shot. And I remember seeing it and going, "Oh my God, this is the first time that TV could do this kind of thing." Because it was the first time, in the early '80s, where you really could count on color television was everywhere, and, and that and that the sets were big enough that you could do a wide shot. The television sets, I mean, were large enough. If you had a 19-inch set in back then, you were living large. So you have to have a large enough television to do kind of cinematic framing. And so now, fast forward to this episode, and you're suddenly, competing with things like Game of Thrones, and you could, you have two issues, which is the time it takes to do shots like that, and the money and the time and the effort, and the time you have in the episode, because our episodes are very short. I think we're down to, I think it's 43 minutes with the commercials. So, so you don't have a lot of time to either stay on a close-up of an actor and kind of get inside their mind, where there's silence and the plot isn't moving forward, or to do a big wide shot showing Kenzie's kind of Herculean efforts to drag Deeks across the horizon. So, and in TV, people aren't used to that. It's not something we all typically do. So when you do it, there's instantly 3 or 4 people going like, "Yeah, this is going to get cut," So you have to fight those things and know that they're worth it. I mean, so much of TV is knowing the story and the script well enough to know what you need and what you don't need.
Right.
And because you can't shoot anything that's not going to, fit in the movie. So, and to set up shots like that are they're time consuming. So you have to have a reason for doing it, and going out in the desert and telling the story of Kenzie and Deeks, of how she did this incredibly heroic thing of dragging this stretcher across the desert. It really called for that. That was the story. The story was, oh my God, you're dragging just for miles and miles and miles, and then you suddenly come to a mountain, and now you've got to drag up a mountain. So that was the story, and so it justified it. And even then, there was at least 2 great shots that didn't make it in the movie because of time. That didn't make it into the episode because of time. So, I hope I am becoming more cinematic. You do feel more comfortable in taking chances. I know at the opening of that last episode of season 9, I began that with a gun battle.
Oh yeah.
And that's something we didn't normally do, which is kind of start in mid-mission.
Yeah.
And also to shoot it, I shot it in a very kind of rough way, in terms of the frame rate that I shot, and there was a complicated process that I had worked out with the director of photography, Victor Hammer. I wanted it to feel like Saving Private Ryan, and you had to do different things because they shot that on film.
Right.
And to do that sequence, you have to also have the confidence to do it. It's another advantage that I have, is that when I'm on set, I'm the writer, I'm the director, I'm the executive producer of the show. So if I want to change something, I don't have to call anybody. I just change it. and I can do incredibly broad changes, and I can also push the limits of the show visually. That other directors would be like, oh, I don't know, you guys don't do this. And, you know, I have the advantage of being able to say, well, yeah, we do right now. And that also goes to the evolution of the show since Scott Gimmel's taken over, because Scott is, you know, he's really lets you do, if you've got a vision and a creative idea, you know, he's smart enough to know we need fresh ideas. We need the show to grow.
Mhm.
So if it's a visual idea, he's always game for it. I mean, the worst that happens is you kind of finish the episode and say, well, that didn't work. It's not really our show, but you may have opened up a whole new kind of visual motif for the
Mhm.
show moving forward, keeping it fresh. And those are the elements that keep you on the air past 10 years.
Yeah.
So that's a big advantage also that I have when I'm directing, is that, you know, I don't have to, there's nobody looking over my shoulder. Now, the flip side of that, which from the very first time I directed also held true, which is I am the writer, I am the executive producer, I am the director. There's nowhere to hide. If that episode isn't good, there is nobody to blame. There was no other element going on there except me. So that's always been a really scary part of when I go to direct. You know, there's no other, there's nowhere to hide. You are naked. This is yours.
All the pressure.
Yeah, and the flip side of that is it's yours. You know,
Yeah.
if it succeeds, if you do something well, then you say, my God, you know, that was from my head and then brought to life. And you know, again, one of my advantages coming from being an actor, you know, you were talking about the scene in Spoils of War with Deeks when he's interrogating the cleric and wrestling with how far to go. Well, I did something that, you know, I don't think we've never done on the show in that episode, which is I called the two guest actors and Eric, and I said, what would you think about, I'm going to rent a room and we rehearse the scene on the weekend. And Eric, as he is with everything, was just so game. Said, yes, let's do it. Let's hit it. And the guest actors came from theater. So they were used to that, which is the thing in TV people aren't used to. They're not used to working the scene and growing the scene. And have great actors, then that to me is the next creative step in the scene. It's not them just getting up and saying the lines. Right. And Eric, there's nobody better, literally nobody better on earth than Eric, whether he's improvising or just allowing the scene, having the confidence to allow the tone and the direction of the scene to ebb and flow depending on how he's feeling, how he's playing off the other actors, what he did the previous time, and so that he's always experimenting and just completely courageous and uninhibited in that. And that, to me, you know, and a lot of actors in TV are like, well, what are we doing? We don't we don't work a scene like this. And it's like, that's the way you do it in good movies and in plays, is you work it and work and work it. And most of the time you don't have the time to do it. So in that scene in Spoils of War, I said, let's rehearse. So we had, 2-3 hours in a room with just the actors, no pressure of shooting, to work the scene.
Wow.
And I could go and tweak it. And, you know, God bless Eric. He was just incredibly willing to do that. Most actors are like, well, I got to get paid, or I don't even want to do it even if I get paid. It's, you know, it's the weekend.
Right.
But that scene was a difficult scene, and an emotional scene. And the great part about it is we got to that set, and those 3 actors they were ready to put on a play. They knew what the scene was. They could get up, and normally you get in there and you rehearse and you do all that. And that scene came up, and I said, "Bring the crew in. Let's show them."
Nice.
You know, you didn't have to. I didn't have to sit with the actors and spend a half hour rehearsing and working on it and blocking, getting them used to whatever my blocking idea was. It was, we have this. Let's just present it to the crew so that, you know, props and lighting and camera and everybody could know what they're watching. So it was an incredible time saver, but it also allowed us to have the time for Eric to do the performance that he did, which I still think is one of the great performances that has ever been done on the show.
Yes, agreed.
It really is. I mean, I put that and Daniela's performances, like on that scene where they broke up on the roof.
Yeah.
And then Danny's performance in this last episode, the Better Angels, you know, where she was talking with the man who's trapped by the car who's about to die. You know, I thought her performance was, you know, there's one thing to get to all of the emotional beats, but to get to them with such grace and there was such an effortless quality, and effortless translates into organic and real quality to what she did, that you know, it was incredible. Really was incredible.
Yes, everyone I think was unanimous in how much they loved that episode, and her performance was really great.
Yeah.
So I'm going to sneak in one last question, which is, can you tell us if you have any more episodes, writing or directing, coming before the end of the season?
I do. Scott and I are working on the end of season 10.
Oh, good.
Right now. Probably should be working harder. But so I have one more. I'm not going to direct it, but I'll write most likely the penultimate episode, and Scott will write the finale, I'm guessing. I don't know. We haven't talked about that.
Okay, great.
But yeah, so that would be for this season. So.
Awesome. Well, after hearing that all of the things that you do on a weekly basis, I can't believe that you found time to talk to me today. So we appreciate it so much. This was such a great opportunity for us, and thank you, Frank. And best of luck for a wonderful end to season 10.
Thank you so much. I really had a lot of fun.